But without a government, who will build the roads? Is everyone going to have their nuclear warheads? Warlords will roam, free, killing indiscriminately. Only the rich and powerful will have access to goods and services that they need in order to thrive. I'm sure if you're a libertarian, an Ancap, or heck, even a constitutional conservative, you've heard some of these silly arguments. But the point of this video isn't to solve all of those questions. The point of this video is to explain that there are free market solutions to some of the problems that they seem to think that only the state can take care of. The point of this video is to explain how a company can be formed and grow through a narrative process that allows us to see how the free market can fix market failures in the form of public goods and services, and understand that we do not need a state, a nation state, or a government in order to fix these problems and have a thriving society and economy. So before we can get into the Richmond Trade Association example that I think answers the question, how do we allocate public goods and services without a nation state, we need to get some fundamentals out of the way. The first of which would be, what is a market failure? Well, a market failure is a situation in which the allocation of goods and services by a free market is not Pareto efficient. And Pareto efficient basically means that the supply and demand equation is met without a negative externality. Now, this can be a little confusing if you don't have a background in economics, but basically negative externalities are a cost to a third party that did not agree to it, right? So company A produces a good, company B buys the good, or an individual buys the good. They have kind of a contract together, but the problem is that company A is polluting the water. Those individuals harmed by the pollution in the water are third parties that did not agree to this pollution as a means of purchasing or selling goods, services, etc., etc. This is a negative externality. Now, anarcho-capitalism and constitutional minarchism has a lot of solutions for these, such as arbitration, insurance companies, individuals divesting from companies, media organizations, and local communities helping to solve information failures. And the only reason I really bring it up is so that when you see these terms or you engage in these conversations, you understand what people are talking about. But that's not specifically what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is a market failure in the form of public goods and services, right? Who will build the roads, if you will? Who will build the levees? Who will, help the homeless? Who will do all of these things that the nation state is currently doing and the free market isn't providing adequate solutions to? So when we take away the nation state, when we take away tax-paying money, how do these problems get solved? And the Richmond Trade Association is the answer to that question, at least in a hypothetical situation. So the next fundamental that we have to get out of the way is how anarcho-capitalism differs from traditional left-wing anarchistic models, as well as communism, socialism, liberal democracies, et cetera, right? And one of the big differences is that there's no public property in an anarcho-capitalist system. And in many constitutional minarchist systems, heavily libertarian systems, there's no public property. Instead, there's just private property. Now, there's also common property, but that gets a little bit in the weeds into the theory. But basically speaking, if you've ever been in a government building, you've ever been on a road, you've ever been to a public park, you understand what public property is, right? You pay taxes through threat of violence, and you can go to this public facility. Presumably you have some share in it. Often you get very little voice or choice in how you deal with this system, and you can't divest from it. You can't not pay your taxes. And so under a fully privatized system, everything is owned by a person or a company, right? The free market, companies, corporations, private individuals renting, et cetera, et cetera. It is the capitalist model that kind of runs the entire system, along with some checks and balances from, arbitration, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next thing that's really different about left-wing anarchist models, right, is that they have systems of delegation and hierarchical governance, right? And so you're like, well, what is that, right? Basically, hierarchical governance is that instead of having a hierarchy where one person is in charge and they kind of tell other people what they can and can't do, they inform the choices that they can make, they use systems of delegation or systems of elders, and et cetera, where everyone kind of has an equal voice, right? Kind of a direct democracy approach, but, utilized in such a way that it's more efficient. This is a possible thing, though it's not something that libertarians tend to agree with as being an efficient way to kind of figure out the problems that we have. And so what we have is systems of individual choice. Every individual is free to do as they please, so long as they don't harm other people, so long as they don't, violate the NAP, the non-aggression principle. Right? And people are free to trade with whom they want, again, so long as they don't violate other people's rights. Well, other systems such as communism and especially socialism and again left-wing anarchism has this idea of mutual aid, and sometimes it's delegated mutual aid, right? So when we have a common problem together, everyone gets together, they agree that we should do something about the problem, everyone knows that something should be done, and there's kind of no free rider problem here. There's no issue with like individuals choosing not to do anything here, because everyone recognizes that they have a collective responsibility, and because everyone is beholden to everyone else, they kind of all chip in to fix the problems that they have. And this tends to work at a small scale level, but anarcho-capitalists disagree that this is scalable, that the larger society would be able to have systems like this. And lastly, anarcho-capitalism uses the free market to solve market failures, right? And that seems kind of like an oxymoron, right? If there's a market failure, obviously the free market isn't solving the situation. But the market failures that we see, we believe to be issues of rent seeking and the state involving itself and large taxation and, judicial systems that benefit large corporations. It's corporatism that has these market failures. And if we can have an unchecked, unrestrained free market that is only checked by violations of private property rights and individual rights and human rights, then there will be a lot more solutions that are able to be brought to the table. But this also presents some challenges that we need to discuss. Well, the free market solves everything. We can just close the video now. We don't need to know anything else. The free market, the invisible hand of the market, laissez-faire capitalism. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and there's no problems ever with any form of capitalist system, and we don't need to explain ourselves, right? Well, this is kind of the problem that Ancaps, libertarians, minarchists, and even constitutional conservatives, again, get into. Well, you can't get into what's known as a God of the gaps argument. Christians like to say, oh, everything that can't be solved is, it's God, so it's a God of the gaps argument, right? We can't do this with the free market. We can't just simply say, oh, the free market will fix it, don't worry about it. Because it's not a very convincing argument. It's not going to win anyone over to our side, and it's not going to be able to allow us to institute the beliefs that we have in reality. Also saying, well, there's charity, right? Charity will fix these problems. Well, yes, there is charity, but charity really isn't a sufficient answer. When you look at how much state funding goes into cancer research, for example, and then you compare it to charity, it's a massive difference between the two. Obviously, there's still a lot of charity that goes into cancer research. And there's a lot of charity that go into a lot of problems that we have, with the invention of things like Kickstarter and stuff like that. There's a ton of charity models, Patreon and things like that. There are a lot of market solutions here, but it's not enough to simply say that people will donate these problems away, because they won't. And the reason they won't is something known as the free rider problem. So basically, this occurs in unions as well as in businesses in an area where a solution towards some threat that threatens everyone needs to be found. If I own a pizza shop and across the street from me someone else owns a pizza shop, it's not wise for me economically and financially for me to donate a bunch of my money to fix a problem that we both have, right? Because if they don't donate the same amount of money, if I don't come to some type of agreement with them that we both donate, a certain percentage of our profits, et cetera, what might end up happening is I'm donating to solve a problem that will help them. They're not donating anything. And then I end up going out of business because they can sell cheaper, better quality pizzas because they're not wasting their money trying to, build a levee so that we don't get flooded in the next hurricane, right? So the Richmond Trade Association is kind of this free market answer of what could the market possibly do in a situation where we can solve the God of the gaps argument, where charity is not enough for us to simply explain away the problem, and how do we deal with this free rider problem in a free and voluntaristic way where people are not forced to pay taxes. So let's engage in a little bit of a thought experiment. Let's assume we live in the anarcho-capitalist utopia, if there ever was such a thing, and there is no state. There is no public property. There are no public goods and services. We're not paying taxes that are funneled into welfare programs or into, state projects that build roads and bridges and, levees and dams and solve problems like homelessness and hunger and et cetera, disaster relief, et cetera, right? And so you live in a place called Richmond, and the local charities are unable to solve homelessness. So what is the situation we're in? Well, the situation we're in is in economic terms known as a missing market, right? A missing market is there is an opportunity for a Pareto efficient market here, but for whatever reason, it's not being utilized. And so a company is founded, the Richmond Trade Association. And what this company does is it starts off by trying to host some charity events and gaining membership from local companies, right? It goes to companies and says, hey, we're doing charity events. We'd like you to bring your food truck here. We'd like you to cater this thing. We spoke to some charities. We take a small, 10%, 15%, 20% overhead. And the rest of this money goes towards this event where we're going to raise some money, and we're going to try and help these charities and churches in the local area raise money so that we can do something about the homelessness on the streets, right? Some companies will want to do this just because it's the right thing to do, right? Some people want to do this because it's hurting their business that there's a lot of homeless people hanging out in the area. And some people want to do this for some form of advertisement, right? To make their company look good. But for whatever reason, this missing market presents an opportunity for a brand new company to get in and make a small profit while starting to help some of the issues in the area. But they have to start small. So the Richmond Trade Association, they've established themselves now, right? They're working with businesses. They have quite a few members. They have some contacts with charity organizations. They're starting to getting a little bit of a profit. Now it's time to define their membership, right? They want to grow as a company, and they can't grow as a company if they keep doing the same thing. So what they do is they start focusing on their membership status. What they do is they start adding prerequisites to their membership status. Now, you might think, why would they restrict the money coming in? But it'll make sense here in a second, right? What they do is they say, okay, if you want to be a member of our company and you want to put a sign up and you want to, host that you are a member of the Richmond Trade Association, you need to pay your workers a certain wage, right? You need to have a certain amount of locally sourced products, right? You need to have certain safety standards and regulations. And these companies agree to this because the membership is starting to add value to their company, right? Their company is being associated with a brand that is starting to grow in the area that says that this is a good company. This is someone that helps the homeless. This is someone that is cleaning up the streets in the area. This is a positive place to shop. And now these prerequisites mean even more for those companies that are already doing that, because it's beginning to prove that they hire their workers for good wages. They locally source whatever it is that they're doing, et cetera, whatever these prerequisites are. And then the membership begins to come with some level of exclusivity, right? Because there's meetings of members, right? And businesses know that they can get into these meetings and they can network with other business contacts by being a member of kind of like the good guys, if you will. They're members of the Richmond Trade Association. They can have their fancy dinners where they pay $10,000 a plate, or they can, be smaller individuals that simply go to some other meetings where they meet other local business leaders, and, somebody that they didn't know about might be able to provide a better good and service and make their own products cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. But for whatever reason, these prerequisites begin to create a system of exclusivity, and they begin to add value to the membership status. And this allows the company to gain in profit and to gain in something else. Well, this something else is brand awareness. If you want to grow your company, more people need to know about your company so that you can network with more individuals to gain resources, to gain donations, or to sell memberships to. So they utilize the profits that they gain by hosting these charity events, by, maybe doing food festivals and having exclusive deals with certain restaurants to do food trucks at these festivals, and growing their brand, right? They want more and more people to know who the Richmond Trade Association is. It's no longer just a soup kitchen that from another church that they helped fund, right? It's no longer the rich and the wealthy in the area, but it's the local population that went to, a folk festival that is like hosted by the Richmond Trade Association. And then they start to go out into other areas. And another thing that they do in order to gain brand awareness is they start doing praxis, right? If you were a charitable company, some type of NGO, of some sort that's trying to grow as a company, you're going to start to increase what it is that you do. You're no longer going to go to a local church and kind of give them money for some food drive, but instead you're going to build your own homeless shelter. You're going to build your own soup kitchens. You're going to, build some type of social care system that allows, the homeless in the area to be able to speak to social workers and psychologists, et cetera, et cetera. You might even get involved in some low-level management of healthcare. Whatever it is that this company is doing, they're trying to solve local problems so that they can grow their brand as this positive and beneficial thing. And as they do this, they expand to new areas, but they also want to start networking and connecting with media organizations. They're not just going to, have a soup kitchen, but instead they're going to have a big event at the soup kitchen, and they're going to invite local media so that local media reports on all the great things this company is doing, so they can get more money, they can get more donors, they can get more individuals aware of how valuable this membership is, so that they're more likely to shop at those businesses that are big supporters of this association when they see a sign in the door, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things start to build upon each other. Well, now the Richmond Trade Association is going to face some challenges. One of the challenges that it has is as it grows, it's no longer going to be able to maintain its bureaucratic size and efficiently compete with other businesses that are trying to do the same thing to solve some of the same similar problems. It has to expand outside of the borders of whatever town it was in, and has to stop trying to solve local kind of homeless and food shelter situations. It'll obviously maintain those places, but it can't grow in that capacity, because as it grows in that capacity, the company gets larger, it gets more bureaucratic, it gets less efficient, and other companies will come in and kind of subsume them. So instead what it does is it increases the scope of the projects that it does. With large amounts of social capital networks between wealthy donors, charity organizations, media contacts, it can now start to branch out into disaster relief. It can branch out into building large projects like levees or dams or bridges that are necessary for the community. It can start to solve bigger and bigger problems within its larger area so that it can grow. And it can do this in a way that smaller, more competitive companies are simply not able to amass this much wealth in order to solve these problems. And so large collective action on these things by engaging the media to talk about something and try and get their donors to do something for, let's say, an incoming natural disaster or to build a new dam, et cetera, all of this is brand awareness, right? All of this allows them to go even further out in scope, to contact more individuals and to grow as a company as they become a larger company. And they go from maybe a local company to maybe a national company, setting aside, obviously, that there is no nation state per se. Well, let's just say Richmond Trade Association is the best company at doing this amongst all the other companies. It is the most competitive. It is the most efficient. And so this company goes from, maybe that national type company into a global company. It's no longer concerned with local homelessness. It's no longer concerned with running a few soup kitchens. Now, this company becomes a company that is designed to stop world hunger or fight climate change or deal with world disasters, right? Maybe it took like some hurricane in the United States type issues, and now it's going to Haiti, and it's going to South America during earthquakes, or it's going to Italy during an earthquake, or it's in Europe during a large volcanic eruption, et cetera, et cetera. And as it does this, what it does is it leaves behind that missing market we talked about earlier. That missing market, though, now has its own blueprint. See, companies have already seen the Richmond Trade Association. They can study what it did, and they can look at its failures, and they can look at its successes. And so its successive generations not only engage in some form of creative destruction where they destroy the small local things that this large global company was doing and eventually outcompete it, but it also sees the blueprint in such a way that it can be better and more efficient. And as this process begins to repeat itself, not only do we have technological innovation, but we have innovation in structure, we have innovation in culture, we have innovation in business practices, because we have a truly free market that's only regulated by violations of human rights and private property rights and the non-aggression principle. So as this company shifts to global issues, it also expands its social capital networks. Right? Many people are always worried that foreign nations will invade if we have this, this weak and ineffectual government. But it's companies like this that grow that are extremely efficient compared to other global companies that are able to network with other nation states, right? Other nation states are going to want to involve themselves in these because they're doing things like solving world hunger. They're solving the problems that these slow, inefficient, expensive systems are completely unable to solve, but instead these companies can solve them. So the Richmond Trade Association has gone from this small missing market company that worked with some local charities and businesses to try and create membership and brand awareness and advertising as a means of solving small local problems, and has now shifted to solving world hunger and disaster relief in the most extreme cases and climate change. But is that is that the end all be all? Is it just, well, this successful company helped solve some problems and so we're better? Well, that's kind of good enough in its own right. But what are some of the other consequences of this? Well, not only is the global company beginning to solve these problems in an efficient way, but what it really means is that it's solving the problems that nation states were stealing tons of tax revenue to supposedly solve, right? This company is going to be more efficient at actually solving these problems instead of, just taking large amounts of tax revenue to engage in some deal with the Paris Climate Accord that inevitably leads to more pollution as we shift manufacturing into third world countries. The other thing is local companies are able to use this missing market kind of blueprint that the larger companies have left behind for them, increasing the efficiency even more by watching the successes and the failures of this company and improving upon them and competing against them so that local companies that are not bloated or bureaucratic are coming up with ever more efficient ways to compete to solve problems, as opposed to a nation state that is wildly bloated and is stealing tax revenue out of taxpayers' wages and out of the stock market and out of property taxes and tariffs and bleeding the economy to very inefficiently put band-aids on these problems. The other thing is that you have this congruence of mutual aid praxis, charities, churches, and companies kind of all coming together and having to work together in these social networks that is a much healthier system than what we have today, where regulations and the state kind of separate these institutions. And the last and most important thing that really needs to be emphasized here is that these problems are solved not by taxes that are then mostly wasted and taken out of GDP and making our economy less efficient, but instead done by for-profit organizations. These companies are creating jobs and growing wealth by solving problems, which is the exact opposite of what occurs under a nation state. So I hope understanding that the Richmond Trade Association is an example of how the free market can solve problems in wonderful and amazing ways. But we have to be able to come up with these types of examples instead of just saying, well, the free market fixes it. And this is the solution to how public goods and services are handled under a free market capitalist system that does not have public goods and services handled by a nation state and taxes. If you like content like this, please give a like and subscribe. But more importantly, follow the Discord and follow us on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty, where we do debate panels. We do almost daily streams talking about anarcho-capitalist and libertarian philosophy, as well as the occasional gaming streams, boycott Blizzard streams, community nights, reading audiobooks, etc., etc. It's a great place to meet other like-minded individuals in the libertarian sphere. And I hope you have a wonderful day. And please, hit us up on Discord if you have any questions or any concerns or comments or ideas for future videos.